Good morning, New Hope. A little bit ago, I was talking to Pastor Dave, and I had told him a story that happened to us recently, and he asked that we share this with the church because it's really a beautiful God story. About a month ago, I was down at L Street with, we were doing some of the feeding of the homeless, and I had brought my sister and a friend of ours, and we were just in the basement in the downstairs putting together some to-go meals. So I really didn't meet too many people, but I met one man in particular that day. His name was Mike, and we had had a little brief conversation. And I had heard Mike's story. He was in a wheelchair. He was a veteran. He was diabetic. He recently had some amputations on his feet. And he really just touched my heart. And I came home, and he was the one that I told Larry about. Larry was going to join us that day, and then he ended up having to work. But I said, I wish you could have been there, because you would have really thought this guy Mike was a character. I would have liked for you to meet him. He actually reminded me of somebody that was very close to me. And that was kind of where we left it. And then about, was it maybe a couple weeks later? 3 weeks later?
A week or two?
Yeah, it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks later. Actually, it was Veterans Day this particular day. And I was sleeping in, and it was about 7:15 you came to me.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to tell that?
And basically, I guess I'll just say that the previous night I was praying, and I prayed for all the blessings, but I also prayed for the challenges that we all face and our family faces, and I welcomed those challenges, knowing that I have faith that God would come through with prayers and solutions and things that were fit to him. And wouldn't you know, the first thing that happened the next morning is I go to take the dog for a walk, and I wasn't really paying attention because you're half asleep, drinking your coffee, walking your dog, and the dog ended up startling something to the side of the road that I wasn't even aware of. And as I looked over, I realized there was a person laying under the leaves. And when I looked closer, I saw that there was actually a wheelchair folded up next to wherever that person had laid down for the night. So I decided to go back and get Sandra, not knowing exactly, who was under the sheet and the leaves. So when I went and got her, she obviously made a coffee, and we went back up and tried to make that person feel as comfortable as possible, not knowing who it was and what it was all about. So long story short, when the person did come out from underneath the leaves, it was a fairly warm morning, about 55, 60 degrees, so that was a blessing. The first words out of Sandra's mouth were, Mike? Mm-hmm. And so, I kind of looked and said, you know Mike? And she's like, yeah, this is Mike from L Street. So long story short, we talked to Mike. He really enjoyed Sandra's coffee. And because it was turning out to be a fairly decent morning, and he looked like he was comfortable out in the environment we were in, we did welcome him back to the house, which was only a half a football field away, and realized that he needed, some things that most human beings need at the start of a day, a hot shower and some clean clothes, and maybe a quick meal and all that. So we went through that process that morning, and it was about a 2 to 3 hour endeavor. And as the morning unfolded, Mike was getting more comfortable with us and opening up and talking. And it just dawned on me that two things. God blesses us with so many things in our path, both challenges and solutions, I call them. He also reminds us of how we're all alike. I'm not very much different than Mike. We were almost the same age. One of us had a roof over our head and one of us didn't. There's a blessing for me, but frankly, Mike wasn't too far from being the same person I am, other than that roof over his head. So it made me think about, again, the blessings that we have. So it was a morning of God's presence in our lives. We have been here 20 years in this location. It's the first time I've actually had the experience of finding a human being out in the woods.
Yeah, we don't live near L Street. We live actually quite far from it. We live in Easton. We live right off of 138. So when I asked Mike how he had gotten here, I just thought maybe someone had dropped him off at the side of the road. And he said he actually wheeled here. And he didn't know where he was going. He just happened to, by happenstance, to end up in our neighborhood. He said that when he came down the street, it was probably very early in the morning and dark, and he said, we have some orange front porch lights, and he said those were like, they just like lit right up at me. It was like having two jack-o'-lanterns out. So this was a lot of God in this story, and I think through 2020, and probably many of us have been asking God, where are you? Because I know I have. You know, where are you? There's so much suffering. There's so much disunity, and like Larry said, this was really a story of God's presence, and you know, He's with us. I mean, He's here, and it was such a great testimony to my sister, to my friend Carrie that came down that morning, you know, of God's presence and God's sovereignty over all of us, that He could bring a man in a wheelchair all the way from L Street to right into our neighborhood. And I know Dave has talked and preached on, you know, our New Hope being in a place that's really not, the community isn't really surrounding it. The people that need us aren't really right out that door. But so he's been asking us to go into those places, and this was right outside our door. And it's not, you know, we, like Larry said, we've been here 20 years. We live in a family neighborhood. This this is really off the beaten path that Mike would end up here. But as God would have it, He did, and it was God bringing him here. It was God, that God had introduced me and him to get, a few weeks prior, so that we would feel comfortable with one another. It was that Larry hadn't dismantled our outside shower, and we were able to just put a chair down and let Mike take a nice long hot shower. It was that Larry was home that particular day. There was just a lot of things that had to happen, that if they didn't happen, if it wasn't warm out that day, if they didn't happen, it wouldn't have worked out so beautifully as it did. And it was just God He's just woven throughout this entire story. And I just think that as we finish off 2020, which has been a really challenging year, and as we enter into Advent and awaiting the coming of Jesus, it's just a great reminder of that God is here, and He's with us, and He's over us, and He will do the most impossible things, and all things are possible with God, right? And this was kind of one of those reminders.
Yeah, life is hard, and God created this so-called biblical story for us. That's what it was, really, 2,000 years later. And I walked away, and I know Sandra did too, with just a feeling of blessings, that as hard as life is, don't ever give up hope. Don't ever give up hope. I know we're praying for Mike, that he might also continue to hope for something. And what we pray for, and what we all pray for at No Hope and Believers, is life, even after death, but life after death. And we're living here for a period of time that is a short period of time. And these things that are placed in our path are placed there for a reason. This one is one of the more fascinating stories I've experienced in 56 years. So wanted to share this with you all and let you know it's a real story that had an impact, and continue to pray for all of you that you will also recognize some of these blessings that God places in your path.
Be well, No Hope.
God bless.